Welcome to Healing Your Life with Soft Roast Recovery. I'm April Davis here with Linsey, Mizic, and Faith Ponti. And we are talking today about core beliefs and negative self-talk when it comes to addiction and recovery. And Faith Ponti is a therapist at Soft Roast Recovery here in Jacksonville, and she's a registered mental health counselor intern, received her 2 bachelor's degrees in sociology and psychology from the University of Tampa, and her master's from the University of North Florida, and as a therapist worked in a variety of settings, including school-based counseling for adolescents, nonprofit counseling for the working uninsured, general outpatient mental health for children and adults, and dual diagnosis, IOP and PHP, and we talk about that from time to time here on Healing Your Life. And then we also have Linsey Mizic. She is a senior therapist at Soft Roast Recovery, and she's a registered clinical, did I just say both? Did I just do Linsey?
You did Faith.
I didn't know you were both interns.
By the state.
Right. Don't worry, I'm gonna edit this out. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. And we have Linsey Mizic here. She's is there only one senior, or are there more than one senior? You're special. 3, 2, 1. And we have Linsey Mizic here. She's the senior therapist at Soft Roast Recovery. She's a registered clinical. So off my game.
It's us. We're throwing you off today.
Registered clinical. So off my game. It's because I'm switching between stuff. I'm gonna delete this because I don't really want to have to edit all this stuff.
Okay. Yeah, intern just means that we are still getting our hours for licensure. But she passed her exam. She has all her. She's just waiting on the state to get their shit together.
Give me a piece of paper that says I'm licensed. So if you don't want to say those parts, you don't have to. The registered mental health clinical.
I would just not.
Yeah, you can leave it out.
You can just say we're therapists. You can just say she's a therapist at Soft Roast and then senior therapist at Soft Roast.
Okay, cool. I'll do that. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Healing Your Life with Soft Roast Recovery on this Sunday afternoon. I'm April Davis here with Linsey Mizic and Faith Ponti from Soft Roast Recovery in Jacksonville. And today we're going to be talking about core beliefs and negative self-talk. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to that and probably want to get past that if you're in the middle of negative self-talk, or you might want to ask some questions, and you can always do that. And I'll give you the number here briefly, but first we want to introduce our guest, and we have Faith Ponti. She's a therapist at Soft Roast, and she received her master's in health counseling from the University of North Florida. She is a therapist again, and she worked in a variety of settings. I'm swear to God, I'm not.
I think we should introduce ourselves, Lynn. I think you can do it.
You want me to do it?
Yes, we can do it.
Oh,
come on,
man.
We got it.
The amount of pressure she feels is the amount of pressure I'm feeling.
I'm gonna do it. I got it.
Oh my God.
I promise. And usually I'm not like this. It's just because had a long day.
It's okay.
My bad.
You really can't introduce yourself?
I mean,
I got it. She didn't want to do it, but she'll do it next time.
I'll do it next time.
Yes. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Healing Your Life with Soft Roast Recovery. I'm April Davis. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday afternoon. And we, as always, have a couple of folks from Soft Roast Recovery here with us. And we're going to talk about core beliefs and negative self-talk today. We have Faith Ponti, and she is a therapist at Soft Roast. And she has her master's from the University of North Florida. And as a therapist, she has worked in a lot of different settings, including school-based counseling for adolescents, nonprofit counseling for the working uninsured, general outpatient mental health for children and adults. And we also have Linsey Mizic here with us. She is the senior therapist at Soft Roast, and she has her bachelor's from the Pennsylvania State University and master's of science in clinical and mental health counseling. And she began her career as a mobile crisis counselor and transitioned into a family-based therapist. So she came here to Florida back in 2019 and began her career in the substance abuse field. And that's what we talk about here every Sunday, working with folks to get into recovery and figure out any sort of substance use issues you might have. So she worked as a detox therapist and primary therapist at a dual diagnosis residential substance abuse treatment facility. And we always have folks that can really help you with any questions you might have, and we'll give the phone number here in a moment. But today we want to make sure we cover the core beliefs, and I want to ask you both, what does that mean? What are core beliefs?
Yeah, so I'm a metaphor girl. as we've learned.
Yes.
So I think a really helpful metaphor to talk about core beliefs are sunglasses, right? So the idea of core beliefs are, what lens are you viewing the world around you, yourself, the people around you through? So an example is, let's say you walk into a coffee shop and you see somebody you might want to be friends with, right? If your lens, if your core belief is, you know, I'm enough, I'm a cool person, I like myself, I'm smart, you're viewing the world through these kind of rose-colored glasses, you see that person and you're like, dang, I'm gonna go up to them, I'm gonna introduce myself, maybe ask if I can buy their coffee. The result of that is gonna be potentially like a positive conversation, best case scenario, maybe you form a relationship with that person, platonic or otherwise. But the confidence enabled via those sunglasses that are showing you, you know, like, okay, I'm a cool person and I'm worthy of having this interaction and I'm likable, allows you to do those kinds of things. Now imagine another person walks into that same coffee shop, sees that person, has a similar reaction of, oh, I really would love to be friends with that person, but the lens they're viewing themselves, the world, and other people through is, I'm not good enough, I'm not likable, I'm not interesting, I have nothing to offer. That person then is probably not going to approach that person in the coffee shop, is not going to want to put themselves out on a limb or put themselves out there to potentially be embarrassed or ashamed by a conversation in which that's going to prove like, oh, I'm not enough, I'm not interesting. They don't buy that person coffee, they don't form meaningful relationships. That's a small example of what happens when an individual's core beliefs are not only negative, but most likely inaccurate. Like, as I think me and Lynn would agree that there's not ever an accurate portrayal of an individual that is, I'm not good enough, right? There's, I've made mistakes, there's, I've maybe hurt people in the past, there's, I'm not great at everything, I'm not perfect, but never, I'm fundamentally not good enough, I'm fundamentally uninteresting. That's never true. So if you're walking through life through the lens of an inaccurate core belief, it will negatively impact almost everything you do, unfortunately. And so when we talk about core beliefs, a lot of times we're talking about them through the lens of negative core beliefs or irrational or harmful core beliefs, because those are the kinds of things that can lead us to really unhealthy behaviors, like isolation, addiction, perpetual, like, unfixable or unpenetrable depression because we're not willing to reframe how we're talking about ourselves. We can also have core beliefs about the world, like, the world is a bad place. Nothing is in my control. There's nothing that I can manipulate within my control, therefore why try? We can have negative core beliefs about other people. Nobody's trustworthy, everyone's gonna hurt me. And the idea of, like, reframing core beliefs, which we're gonna talk about later, is kind of the skill to take any kind of extreme form of core belief, like, I am not worthy, people are not trustworthy, the world is a bad place, and lessening the severity of those to make it a more realistic statement. So I'm not worthy is an extreme statement. I've made mistakes is a less extreme, more realistic statement. The world is a bad place is an extreme, unrealistic statement. The world can be scary sometimes, some unexpected things happen, that's realistic. Nobody can be trusted, extreme statement. Sometimes I need to be careful about who I give my trust to, or maybe I need to be more aware of who I'm telling personal things to, a less extreme, more realistic statement. If over time you can adjust your core beliefs to, like, I'm worthy and I deserve love, and then also, like, adjust your self-talk to those less extreme negative statements, you're gonna start walking into coffee shops with, like, rose-colored glasses that allow you to create meaningful relationships and just like yourself better.
Yeah, and I want to talk about how that relates to substance use and recovery. But first, let me give you the phone number for Soft Roast Recovery. That number is 904-439-4805. Again, 904-439-4805. And that is for Soft Roast Recovery here in Jacksonville. And so we're talking about core beliefs, which is so interesting because I always try and make a point not to make any assumptions about anybody, because you may think, oh, that person's withdrawn and they're just, not a nice person, or whatever the case may be. We all make assumptions, whether we like it or not, because that's human. But it kind of puts it in perspective. You never know what people are thinking about themselves, and maybe they're just not talking to you in the coffee shop scenario because they're not confident in themselves. And so how does that relate to substance abuse and recovery?
I think in a lot of what Faith talked about, we're talking about core beliefs and relating them to self, others, and the world, and wrapping that back into how does that impact addiction. it gives a little bit better of insight of recognizing addiction as a disease, and not recognizing it as a choice, right? A lot of people exist in that stigma of, well, you choose to do this, right? And I think I've made the example before in the show of, I've never met a person that woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm going to be an alcoholic, I'm going to be an addict. Like, this sounds like a good time, I'm going to burn bridges, I'm going to ruin my relationships, I'm going to feel miserable physically, mentally, emotionally. Nobody does that. And so relating, if somebody that struggles with addiction has these negative core beliefs, that's going to exacerbate now something that I've been able to find that makes those things go away, right? So, for example, let's say, the sunglasses. So if you go into a coffee shop and before I used to be really confident. I used to feel really good. I used to be really confident in myself. And now I'm not as confident, right? Well, why am I not as confident? We start to try to figure that out. As people, you try to figure that out. Your layman person isn't going to identify it as a core belief, right? They're not going to go, oh, I think my core belief might be, maybe I don't like this thing because of this thing. What's going to happen is they're going to go, oh, I'm unworthy. Oh, people don't like me. I must not be relatable. And that's going to get worse and worse and worse as we don't recognize it. And then somewhere along the line, we find a substance.
And I think also using the substance, it feels like a temporary relief from those sunglasses. Yeah. So it's almost like if the sunglasses feel super glued to your face, the substance will kind of like loosen them and make them like not feel as connected to your face. The unfortunate part is like every time you use the substance, it's seemingly confirming whatever negative self-talk you have. Right. So it's the shame cycle. So if I'm not worthy, but I'm going to use, because that lessens the severity of that belief, because it lessens the severity of all feelings, because it numbs me. So I'm not worthy, I'm going to use and feel numbed. I'm going to come to and realize what I just did in my addiction. Oh, I'm not worthy. Okay, wow, I need to numb that again. And it's over and over. And actually what ends up happening is the temporary relief of like unsuper gluing those negative sunglasses. It's actually like every time you're putting more and more super glue on your face, which is why me and Lynn are employed, why we have jobs, why substance abuse, why rehab's a thing. Yeah. Right? Because we have to get some rubbing alcohol and get that super glue off your face to take those sunglasses off.
Yeah. And I think something important to kind of point off of, back to that piece of, your layman person doesn't recognize a core belief. A really useful way to start recognizing core beliefs, or trying to figure out, okay, maybe like what are my core beliefs, is if you're realizing you're talking in finite terms, right? If you're saying, well, I am only, I am just, I never, right? If you start using terms like that, so we call them filler words. And it's one of the things that myself, I try, and I can't say I confidently do it all the time, but I try, is if I'm ever talking about myself, I try to not use filler words, because I'm diminishing myself. I'm setting an expectation that I'm going to fail, right? So things like should, just, only, never.
Oh, I always do this. Yeah. Oh, I never do this. Oh, I'm so bad at this. I'm not capable. Yeah. Versus like, oh, this is an area of growth for me. Yeah. I always stop clients when they say, oh, I'm really bad at this. I said, reframe. Yeah. I'm working on this.
Yeah. Historically, I might not be very great at this, but I want to be better, right? And so being able to, if you can start to identify where you're saying those things, then the core beliefs will come into picture.
Right. Yeah. And Faith has said that to me already. I said something like, oh, I'm sorry. You were like, don't be sorry about that.
Yeah.
And so I love that you are able to help your clients that come in and people that have asked you about that. It's so amazing what you guys bring in every single week, talking about, because everybody has this, right? And so where does it come from? I mean, I clearly think there's got to be some sort of a family effect, or however you were raised.
Yeah, I think it depends on the therapist you ask. I think it depends on like the theory they're coming from. Right now we're talking about like theoretical frameworks, but sure, I think a really, maybe I would think obvious one is when we're little, unfortunately, somebody put the sunglasses on us, right? From something as small as like you dancing and singing around your room, and mom says, you're not a good dancer.
Right.
It's the first time like, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, I'm annoying, or oh, I'm too much. And the unfortunate reality is you'll be talking to somebody, right? And they could be someone who gets so much positive feedback, so much love, but the weight of those sunglasses and the weight of viewing your life through that lens, which maybe was put on you without any intention of your own, without any control. Your brain wasn't formed, right? Probably when somebody put those first pair of sunglasses on you. It's really unfortunate. It's why you see some of the most influential people in the world, or some of the happiest people in the world, right? Like really suffer with depression because at some point in their lives, someone told them something who knows, out of jealousy, out of malice, out of their own lenses, right? Like, the world can't be trusted, or people are annoying, right? So now I'm gonna say that to somebody, put a pair of glasses on them, and now we're existing. The cool part, I will say, is like our brains are so plastic that we are 100% capable of reframing sunglasses, of reframing those core beliefs and like making them more positive. But I tell clients, I think that's one of the hardest things you'll do, because it sounds lovely, like, wow, I'm so excited to find who put them on me right first, or where they came from, how to figure out how to take them off, and how to learn, like, okay, like more healthy coping skills for when I feel that way. It sounds so beautiful. The work is so unfortunately difficult, and I can say that from first person perspective. Like, I'm still wearing some sunglasses sometimes. I got to take them off every day, you know, and sometimes I'll realize halfway through the day, like, dang, I put these vintage sunglasses on, my high school sunglasses. Why are those on my face?
Yes, I think every single person who is listening, because we're all human, can relate to, you know, some negative core beliefs, and there are probably are there positive core beliefs?
And that was the other piece I was going to say is there's the negative, right? We know those ones well. Everybody knows those ones well. We know what we don't like. We don't always know what we like. And so the hard part of that is sometimes, unfortunately, the world can see that as vain, right? To, you know, say kind things about yourself, to be proud of the outfit you put on that day, you know, to be proud of the things that you've accomplished, you know. And so we do this activity, and it's a house. And so we talk about different aspects that are in this house, but one of the most important is there's a sign outside. And I tell clients, put 3 things on there that you are proud of, you'd want other people to know. It's the hardest question for everyone to answer. They're always like, well, I don't know. And they always say things that, a lot of the time, you know, they'll often say things that are not pertaining to them, but are pertaining to
how they serve others.
Things externally.
I'm a great mom. I'm a great mom. My
kids are great, right? Which is wonderful and beautiful. But what about you? What is it about you? What about you is wonderful? And that can be incredibly difficult to identify, to say, what is great about me? Because you've been so used to hearing, well, I don't really like this thing about you. Which
is why the work of reframing is so hard, because you have to tell yourself, like, it's okay to say really kind things about myself. And not only can that feel uncomfortable, it can sometimes feel corny, right? For me to, like, tell my client, hey, look in the mirror and say, like, I'm awesome, I'm beautiful. They're gonna be like, ugh. Because it's not cool, right? These days, it's like the self-deprecation is cool.
It's
normal. In.
I had a therapist when I was a teen, and one of the most important things she's ever taught me, and I still use it when I need it, is something that I practice. And she'd say, Lindsay, when you go to bed at night, put your hand on your heart and say, good night, Lindsay. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And she was like, do the same thing when you wake up in the morning. And I was like, she was like, if you try it for a month, every day, and even if you are just faking it, even if you're saying it sarcastically, and I kid you not, by the end of that, like maybe 2 or 3 days before the end of the month, it was just like one morning I woke up and I did it, and it was different. I don't know what about it was different, but I felt in myself, right? It was just completely different. And I remember doing it, going, good morning, Lindsay. I went, and I just remembered, like, the feeling that came with that. And I went, wow, I hope that I can help other people experience this, because that was then the thing that helped me start to reconnect, to say, wow, there are really good things about me.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It seems so self-soothing to do something like that, to be able to recognize and love yourself in that moment. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, and what is the impact of this negative self-talk when we do this to ourselves when we come back. And your therapist, Linsey Mizic, and therapist Faith Ponti from Soft Roast Recovery. And we are talking about negative self-talk and core beliefs, and we want to move on to what is the actual impact of all of that. If we're doing that negative self-talk on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, what is the effect going to have on us and our self-esteem?
So when we were thinking about negative self-talk, it's funny that we did it this direction, actually, is when we have negative self-talk, that creates a core belief.
It confirms it.
Right, it confirms that negative core belief. But when we're talking about self-esteem, I mean, it encourages the things we're already struggling with, right? We've got negative self-esteem, we've got positive self-esteem. Again, most people associate with negative self-esteem. When you think self-esteem, people think bad, right? They think, oh, we're talking about my self-esteem, it's not good, right? Not, I'm talking about my self-esteem and it's good. And so, negative self-talk, I mean, it's the things that if you wouldn't say it to a friend, you don't say it to yourself, right? And I know it's cheesy and it's cliche, but that's something that we reframe all the time to say, would you say this to someone you love, right? The thing that you're saying out loud to yourself, would you say it? I ran a group a couple of weeks ago, and I asked my clients all to write down the worst thing they've ever said to themselves. And then I asked them all to say it out loud. And that was hard. And then I asked them all, we stood up in the room, me and them face to face, one at a time, and I asked them to look me in my face and say it to me. And it was hard. Some people, at first, it was kind of like they were laughing. By the end, we were not laughing, right? Because they were like, I can't say this to you. And I was like, we're going to say it. I need you to look me in my face, and I want you to say it. And it was difficult, because it's not things you would say to other people, but it's things that we get so used to saying to ourselves, and it becomes a cycle. It becomes a cycle of, well, if I keep saying how terrible of a person I am, I'm going to fit the bill, right? If I keep saying how mean of a person I am, I'm going to fit the bill. If other people tell me how mean I am, I'm also going to fit that bill, right? Because it's a very natural defense when we start introducing self-talk and we identify it negatively or positive. Again, most often negative is, well, that's just who I am, right? That's how I grew up. I identified that as all the time.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, Linsey, you're not nice, you're not kind. And I was like, well, if you think I'm not nice and I'm not kind, then I'm gonna amp it up a little bit. I'm gonna make sure I fit that, because that was how people saw me. That was my personality. That was who I was. And I thought, well, I need to live up to it in some terms. And when you start to shift that, that's also incredibly uncomfortable for people, because they still associate the things you struggled with before with who you are now.
Yeah. And I think we struggle a lot. I think it's a societal thing. Every culture, every
100%.
society is so different, right?
Yeah.
From one country to the next, or one state to the next, and whatever social group you may be in. But I think what I'm hearing you say is, you can talk yourself into anything. You can
Absolutely.
talk yourself into being who you really truly want to be.
Absolutely.
Or you can just talk yourself into a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that leads to behaviors that you guys deal with on a regular basis. And that's why we're talking about this today, because sometimes it can also lead to substance abuse or the continuance of it.
Correct.
Because the more you practice something, whether it's good or bad, whether you identify it as good or bad, it's positive or negative, the better you get at it.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest pushbacks when I'm first introducing this concept, so the first thing you have to do is, we're going to talk about that next, of how to address it, but you have to recognize you're doing it, right? So, but then when we talk about, okay, so let's reframe it, a big pushback is, but I can't just go easy on myself. I have to it's tough love. Like, I have to tell myself that I'm doing a bad job. I have to tell myself that I'm too chubby, or that I'm not smart enough, or that I can't do anything right, or I'm not a good mom, because if I don't say those things, I'm not going to get better, right? And my thought process is, listen, like, we're not in a CrossFit training gym every day of our lives, and that's a lovely concept for 30 minutes of your day, if that's going to help you do heavier squats. If you are yelling at yourself like a drill instructor every day of your life, you honestly might get results. Whatever the goal is, maybe short term you will get results if you try and just beat yourself down into meeting a goal. Long term mental health, wellness, positive relationships, sobriety does not happen by doing that. We talked about this on break. I firmly believe that you cannot hate yourself or be mean to yourself into a version that you will love. So if your goal at the end of your life, right, is to have met these 3 like body image goals or sobriety goals or whatever, but to not be happy, to not like yourself, to not have fruitful relationships, the chances of you meeting those goals by being mean to yourself is, I don't know, probably not great, but try. If you don't want to be happy and you don't want wellness, whatever. If your goal is really beautiful, loving, vulnerable relationships with yourself and other people, fruitful, meaningful life goals having been met in graceful and gentle ways, you cannot do that with negative self-talk. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and you just mentioned relationships. We'll talk about that in just a second. Let me give you the phone number for Soft Roast Recovery. It's 904-439-4805. Again, Soft Roast Recovery, 904-439-4805. So obviously this can affect your own self-esteem and how you feel, but how does it affect your relationship with other people?
Well, isolate.
Mhm.
If you don't like yourself, you don't think you have anything to offer, or you're really fixated on some of your past negative behaviors or the potential for future negative behaviors, because that's always there, you won't want to touch relationships. If you don't trust people and that's the belief that you're walking through life with, you're not gonna form meaningful relationships. You're gonna have a guard. It's gonna really prevent vulnerability, and vulnerability allows connection. Positive. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it made me think of Linsey's example. I'm curious what happened when you flipped the script and you started, when you finally had that revelation of, oh, hi, what were you saying to yourself?
Good morning, Linsey.
Good morning, Linsey. But I think that's kind of, there's transformation, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was what we call in the substance use world an aha moment, right? Is, oh, like I can like me. I don't actually have to, I don't have to fit the bill, right? I don't have to. What is that serving me, right? We often ask our clients, is this serving you? What purpose is this serving you, right? Is this helpful? Is there a benefit? Do you feel good, right? And most of the time the answer is, well, sometimes, a little bit. Not really. No, I don't. And we get to the core, right, of, oh, no, I don't. And so that transformation is, for a lack of better words, feel good, right? And it's natural feel good. It's feel good you get to give yourself.
It's peace, contentment. And if you start to nurture yourself, you start to realize, oh, I deserve to be nurtured by other people. So if you're somebody who will be talking to somebody and you're like, oh, they're so happy, they're so nice, like, this feels weird. If you don't know how to be kind to yourself, and somebody being kind to you feels uncomfortable, when you start to say, hey, good morning, Faith, good morning, Linsey, like, I hope you have a wonderful day. When people in your life start not treating you that way, you're like, oh, okay, like, this is old, this jacket doesn't fit me anymore, I do deserve kindness and nurturing. And now you're starting to identify healthy and unhealthy relationships in your life, and then you start to change the architecture of what your life and your future look like. But if you receive a lot of negative stuff from yourself, your expectations and what you're going to receive from other people tanks.
The bar will be very low.
It makes me think of the law of attraction. You know, the energy you put out is going to be a lot of the energy you get back. And we all know that just from, I loved your coffee shop example, you know, but we all know that just from being around people that have good energy and are positive, and we know that they love themselves. Now, whether they're vain is a whole nother thing, but it is funny that we perceive it that way. I thought that was a good observation, that sometimes when we love ourselves and we say something like, you know, I like the way this dress looks on me today, that someone might think you're conceited.
And just, we all know, to make this a very, very, you know, kind of basic example, we all know somebody in our lives, or an actor or whatever, that you see and you just see a picture of them and maybe you don't look twice, or maybe it doesn't, you know, you're like, oh. And then that person's energy, their vibe, their willingness to be comfortable with themselves, it's like so many people are attracted to them, whether, you know, romantically or not, right? It's when we look at ourselves just as stills, right? Or just as, you know, in the mirror in the morning, we're kind of like, you know, we can have whatever negative or positive opinion, but two people that look very similarly and maybe have similar educations, similar incomes, similar houses, whatever, both don't have driver's licenses, like whatever. And those two people walk into a room, they can have very different experiences based on how they're talking to themselves. They could both have had similar childhood trauma. They could both have had people be very hurtful to them. One of them could have done the work to say, I don't really like these sunglasses, and one of them didn't, right?
And clearly we've talked about, you can change your core beliefs.
Absolutely.
And that's, I'm sure, what you work on with your clients at Soft Rose all the time. So let's give the phone number one last time before we go to break, and we can talk about how can you work on addressing negative self-talk when we come back. And here's the phone number for Soft Roast Recovery. It is 904-439-4805, 904-439-4805, and we'll be right back.